My name's Peter Sentz. I'm a member of the Champaign-Urbana branch of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So the Party for Socialism and Liberation started in 2004 in San Francisco in the middle of the anti-war movement during the Iraq War. Locally, the Champaign-Urbana branch started in late 2016. A group of us were feeling pretty disillusioned with the recent election, and we started off as a socialist reading club and got in touch with this national organization and decided to start a branch here in town. So we have been around for nearly 4 years at this point. Back in the book club stage, we were a very tightly knit group of friends, meeting in someone's living room with a case of beer and just talking for a couple hours on Monday nights. As we've grown into an organization, we have expanded membership beyond this narrow group of friends, increased diversity, gotten students from the university, and have made a lot of contacts with members in other locations as well. The Party for Socialism and Liberation on a national level believes that the system of capitalism, imperialism, and exploitation needs to be replaced with socialism, and they believe in a revolutionary solution to the problem of implementing socialism. But for that to happen, it requires the will of and the power of the people. So our primary goal at this time is to raise the consciousness of working class and oppressed people, joining in their struggles both locally, nationally, and showing solidarity internationally, to show that we're on their side, help what we can with providing solutions to their problems, and in the process raising their consciousness towards more structural changes of the economic and political system. Of course, on a national level, many people in the working class and oppressed groups of people are members of the party, so it's not a paternalistic kind of goal, but it's more of self-empowerment and raising the consciousness of working class people. So locally, our organization has led a number of anti-war demonstrations, most notably the missile strikes in Syria shortly into President Trump's presidency. Earlier in 2020, in January, we led a protest when the U.S. was posturing towards possible war with Iran, and led a protest here in Urbana. Beyond protests, we also host forums and study groups. For example, we did a forum last year about the coup in Bolivia. One of our members from San Francisco, Gloria La Riva, she traveled down to Mexico when the migrant caravan was traveling north towards the border, and she traveled with them, filming and interviewing them, and we hosted a meeting where we showed that interview and talked about the migrant caravan. And we also help out with other groups' protests, other groups' forums, assisting GEO with strikes, kind of a lot of things over the years. And we've also helped out of town actions when Donald Trump visited Carbondale 2 years ago. We traveled down there and helped with a protest that was being planned there. We traveled to Jefferson City, Missouri, when that city banned drag queen reading hour, where drag queens would read children's books to children, and a new law had banned that, and there was a big protest there. So we've done a lot locally and in the Midwest area. So the IMC has almost always been our home for the local branch. Before we had an office, we were meeting in the basement in the family room. We've hosted a lot of events here and have gotten a lot of support from the IMC over the years. It's a great space for a lot of different activist organizations, and it's necessary for us to maintain those connections. So in terms of community and even just a space for meeting, it has been an integral part of helping our local branch succeed. So the recent protests, have been successful in really drawing in the nation's attention, I would say, on a larger level, and that manifests itself locally as well. I think we've made our presence known. I think we've demonstrated that it wasn't a temporary flash in the pan for a couple weeks after the murder of George Floyd. In terms of what else needs to be done, we need to make sure to continue this movement strong when the students come back, where a lot of other groups, have done activism for many years. We need to make sure that we're not only doing demonstrations out on the streets or in parks or other public places. We need to make sure that we have a presence at local government, so city council meetings, county board meetings. Unfortunately for us now, they're all digital, but still we should continue to have a presence there. I think a big demand that we should start asking of these local governments is a demand to democratize information. So if we want free healthcare for Champaign County residents, if we want housing for everyone in Champaign County, there's a whole list of local departments and organizations. Who do you go to? Who is preventing universal housing, universal healthcare? Is it the unwillingness of the city? Is it the state legislator that is preventing local government from doing something? And the information is so almost intimidating and spread out all over the place that I think we need to start, demanding answers from local government about what are the solutions, instead of us coming up with all the details. Well, how about we tell you what we want and you give us the details of what would need to be done. And finally, I would say that it's important to get a wide variety of different groups in the struggle. So obviously the story on everyone's mind this summer has been police violence against black people in America. We also need to remember that there are other oppressed groups that we will be stronger. Our movement will be stronger with those other oppressed groups. For example, undocumented community locally, the Congolese community locally, other oppressed groups, union workers going on strike, for example, in SEIU, building workers at the university. And if we come together with these, varying struggles, we can be much stronger and be much more effective. And beyond locally, police violence against Native Americans, for example, military violence against oppressed people, including black people in Latin America and Africa, is another thing that we should always keep in mind about how struggles are linked together and what other groups can join us and make us stronger. In terms of Aaliyah Lewis, her court date is coming up on August 11th, and PSL and Champaign County Anti-Racist Coalition, this closely coincides with the launching of what we're calling the 10 Days, 10 Demands, where the Anti-Racist Coalition has come up with a list of 10 demands, and we're going to have 10 maybe mini demonstrations at different locations throughout the county, and this coincides closely with Aaliyah Lewis's first court date. I think that showing up to the courthouse during her hearings, making it clear that there's a community on her side, it's not just her and her family and her attorney, it's an entire community on her side, will definitely put some pressure on folks, and by folks I mean the justice system, to possibly consider dropping the case or reducing the charges. I think that we have this view of the justice system as this kind of highly objective, detached observer that only makes decisions based on law books and precedent, when I don't think that's true. I think that the legal system feels pressure just like any other political organization. I think that the Supreme Court, striking down the Defense of Marriage Act is a good example of that. I don't think the Supreme Court would have struck that down without 30 plus years of LGBTQ, activism. So I think that we need to get away from viewing justice system as different from politicians. Beyond showing up to the court dates, again, this goes back into the democratizing of information. When we tried doing a call-in about freeing prisoners from the jail, it was very difficult to get in touch with district attorneys or judges or the sheriff's department. And part of our demands is how are you going to provide a mechanism for us to make our voices heard? So it's a complicated process, but I think we have to start by changing our view of what the legal system is really, how capable it is of being pressured, and I think it falls into demanding this democratization of information on a local level. So our primary role has been a supporting one through the Champaign County Bailout Coalition, which assisted in providing the bail for those arrested on May 31st. In terms of a leading role in getting those dropped, those charges reduced or dropped, actually, I think that it has been much less talked about than Aaliyah Lewis. I'm not entirely sure about the reason why. I think, and I don't want to make any accusations, but I'm wondering if that the way those protesters are being presented as looters or non-peaceful protesters, which I think we should reject that narrative, has maybe made their plight get buried a little bit. I think that depending on how this campaign for Aaliyah Lewis goes, I think that continuing that momentum towards these people who were arrested on May 31st would be an important next step. And we can't, it's of no use to moralize about how people choose to express resistance and rebellion in face of, at this point, centuries of state and police violence against them. So I think it is important that down the road, hopefully once Aaliyah Lewis's charges are dropped or reduced, we need to immediately switch the focus to those arrested on May 31st. So to defund the police, the main pressure points are three: the Champaign County Board, the Champaign City Council, and the Urbana City Council. The Champaign County Board handles the funding for the Sheriff's Department. The Urbana and Champaign City Councils, pass the legislation for the city and funding and things of that sort. So this goes into not just protesting outside police stations and marching down the streets, which are very important parts of the movement, but going to the meetings where those with power are meeting and holding them accountable or asking questions or demanding information that is not easily accessible to the public. And again, there's so many questions about how much of the city's funding is tied to like state legislation. Like, is there a minimum amount that they need to give to their police departments or things like that? And these questions are not ones I'm prepared to answer because this information can be so difficult to find. So again, we need clear answers, and we need politicians to be willing to give us that information, or if not willing, being pressured heavily into giving us that information. I think that also, now I don't know how this has manifested itself in Champaign County, but nationwide you see militarization of the police. And a lot of this comes from military, surplus military equipment. So having a movement that also seeks to defund the military, I think is also something that can't be neglected. We spend more than the next 8 countries combined on our military, and a lot of this comes back to our police at home, not to mention things like other countries such as Israel that have provided weapons or other tools for militarized police to use, or sometimes even direct training. So I think it's going to take, obviously applying pressure at those pressure points of local power, but also it needs to include, an international discussion on our military, which is an international police force. So on an organizational level, if you want to see what the Party for Socialism and Liberation views on the movement to abolish police, we actually have a recent article out on that. We published these articles on liberationschool.org and also liberationnews.org. And the article is called "How Will the Police Be Abolished? A Marxist Perspective." From our perspective, the police serve to protect the interests of capitalism and the ruling class. And while we support the abolishment of police, we do not think it is possible under the current economic system. Abolishing the police under capitalism would be the end of capitalism, which those in power would not willingly do. So I think that the movement to abolish police needs to be tied heavily in with the movement to establish socialism. When we have an economic system based on exploitation and where private property is more important than people's lives, health, and dignity, as we can recently see with the Champaign County's description of chalk as an urban blight, whereas there has been no statements about the urban blight of our people living in parks or hungry children, and then the audacity to say that we should act as neighbors to each other. Demonstrate that's a microcosm of how private property is highly valued in when you compare it to human life and dignity. So the movement to abolish police needs to be, needs to have a long-term focus. I think we need to. It needs to be built into the demands for socialism and the end of capitalism. And of course, those are intimately related with the issues of racism. I don't think that one can fight to establish for socialism without addressing racism, as I don't think that racism can be adequately addressed under capitalism either. So I think that's what I would highlight. That's what I would stress the most about the the abolishing of police, that it's a long-term goal that we may not see even in our lifetimes, whereas defunding the police is more of a short-term tactic that can weaken their power, provide some relief to over-policed communities, and hopefully provide relief by moving funds to taking care of people's needs. So I would view one as a short-term goal or tactic, and one as a long-term goal or strategy. So our organization does consider itself to be a revolutionary organization, and has been since its inception in 2004 on a national level. In terms of what that looks like in Champaign-Urbana, that is very difficult to say. So one of the people that we study a lot and discuss a lot is Vladimir Lenin, and with his writings on the state and what happens during a revolution. And what he mentions is that a revolution is preceded by a revolutionary crisis. So in the case of 1917 Russia, that was World War I, and people starving when they were being sent off to war. In other cases, it's something that can be completely unexpected. He looks to late 1800s France, where a French naval officer, I believe, who was Jewish, was unfairly tried and convicted to life in prison. It nearly caused its own revolution, and we can't really predict that an anti-Semitic trial of a naval officer would have been the spark that led to a revolution. And we see it today in 2008 with the financial collapse and the Occupy movement that came out of that. Tunisia, there was the protester who lit themselves on fire, and it coincided with the Arab Spring. And so these things are not something that one can predict. So our perspective is always that you can't control when this next crisis is. We couldn't on May 1st, we couldn't predict the murder of George Floyd. What you can do is lay the groundwork for organization to provide itself for the people when that crisis erupts. And that can only be done by demonstrating beforehand that this is the group that can do it. So growing the party nationwide, and growing the party doesn't just mean getting people to sign up online and getting people who already agree with us politically. It means getting involved in strikes, getting out in community service, demonstrations, community education, and meet people where they are and help them with their local struggles first. And hopefully, as it grows and more people join us and lend their perspective to the party, because of course we need all kinds of people's experiences, perspectives to be a strong revolutionary organization. One day with the next crisis, we can reach a critical mass where, this crisis isn't just a temporary push, but it turns into a revolutionary wave. In terms of preparing for that, if we had an extra hour, maybe I could talk about it. But I think we need to get people understanding their own power. And CCARC, I think actually, CCARC, the Champaign County Anti-Racist Coalition, has a great idea with respect to this in terms of the concept of dual power, where our goal, while currently it's demonstrations, reducing the charges on Aaliyah Lewis, we should try to build dual power structures, like in the working class, Black and other oppressed peoples in their communities, developing neighborhood councils or other neighborhood groups that provide an alternative for organizing than simply going to the police or the elected officials of the current state government and start having people believe that they can lead themselves. And when you get into a crisis, you know, if there's another murder that lights off a crisis or another financial collapse that lights off a crisis, if you have these neighborhood councils or whatever kind of dual power structure that can exist, it makes it so much easier to, you know, turn that into something to replace the current system when a crisis erupts. So we can't just throw out the system without having a replacement ready. And so building that dual power structure and building people's confidence and consciousness into knowing that they themselves can lead themselves is an important part of that.
And why did you decide to enter into a coalition with these other organizations? What advantages does this have for obtaining your goals?
So we entered in this coalition because we saw the wave of protests that happened after the murder of George Floyd, which was a very exciting time, very invigorating time, and I mean, in that first huge march on June 1st, I believe, just looking back and seeing thousands of people with us was an incredible feeling. But I remember the original wave of Black Lives Matter back with the murder of Michael Brown about 7 years ago or so, and it kind of dwindled away to a point. While there's always been a movement there, it didn't have the same impact as the immediately after the murder of Michael Brown, and we don't want to see that happen now. We want this movement to continue, and the problem with a lot of groups working in isolation is that if you work in isolation, you can get a myopic vision, you can miss out on things that are already happening in the community, and you can miss out on other people's perspectives and strategies for dealing with these things. So we felt it was important that we couldn't just work in isolation as the PSL in the midst of this. We needed to not only make the movement stronger by getting groups together, we also need to learn where people are at. While we're a socialist party, not everyone out at those protests are socialists. Not everyone shares our political views. And the best way to talk about these ideas of socialism and how capitalism and racism are like inextricable is not to stand on a street corner and be like an evangelical and try to convince people when they just want to get to work or want to get home. But you have to demonstrate that you want to help and are concerned about their problems. I think if you've demonstrated your dedication to the cause, then you can start talking about kind of expanding these other dimensions, whether that's socialism, whether that's U.S. military bases in Africa or U.S.-backed coups in Latin America, or even more locally, indigenous issues in other states where in other states they are some of the highest demographics in terms of police violence itself. So we have to know what people are thinking. We have to know what's going on in their life, what struggles they're dealing with. We can't just post on Facebook. We can't just write articles and hand out newspapers. You need a hands-on approach, or else you're not going to really reach anybody or make any lasting impact. So in that regard, we knew that there were groups out there that while they might not be socialist or might not be interested in some of the other topics that we care about, we know that we're on the same page when it comes to racism and police brutality. And we know that we can work together with them and tackle this issue and, hopefully down the line, start a broader movement towards, changing the system and the way of life that we currently have.